So we're live. Welcome everybody to this debate here on the Zoom call, and also those of you who are connected and who are watching the live stream on Facebook. It is my pleasure to welcome you all here. My name is Florian Eder. I'm a part-time professor at the European University Institute, and there in particular at the School of Transnational Governance, and I am also a journalist, and it's my big pleasure to kick the webinar off today, and then hand over to an excellent row of panelists for the next hour or so, where we want to discuss together here a quite ambitious goal. Let me put it like that. The title of this webinar, in the run-up and on the road to the 4th Siena Conference on the future of Europe, which will take place in June, is the European Union as the lab for experimenting innovations to save liberal democracies from decline. So no less than that is what we have in mind to discuss today. And I will just briefly walk you through what you should expect from the webinar today. After I will hand over the microphone and the floor to Francesco Grillo and Luca Verzichelli. Francesco is a director of the Vision think tank and a visiting fellow at the European University Institute. Luca Verzichelli, a professor at the University of Siena and the president of the Italian Political Science Association. And both of them will make introductory remarks to walk you a little bit to the initial problem setting and to the topic that we want to discuss today. After that, it will be mostly on Jamie Mackay, a research associate at the EOI, who's connected here already, to set us up and to start a discussion and the debate on this on the ambitious road that we're embarking. He will be later joined by Jelena, Dzankic, and Kalypso Nicolaïdis, who are both professors at the European University Institute, before we come to a discussion among the students at the University of Siena. And afterwards, of course, we would like to take questions from the audience and would like to answer them. So you can ask your questions on social media or in the chat if you are connected to this Zoom call here. That's it already from my end. I wish you all an intriguing and an interesting and an exciting discussion in tonight's webinar, and I would like to hand it over to Francesco Grillo, who I think goes first. Francesco, floor is yours.
Okay, thanks a lot, Florian. I'm very pleased to follow up Florian Eder, who is not just a journalist, who is a proper innovator, radical innovator of your business as a co-founder of Politico Europe. And yeah, we are very much talking about innovation. Innovation is a word which is not necessarily normally linked to the notion of democracy. We are, thanks to technologies, we are changing our way to think, our way to make friends, and many different things, and yet we are still more or less voting in the very same way our let's say parents used to vote. So I also must say that today it is a rather important seminar because it's the first on the road to the 4th conference on the future of Europe, Vision Pontignano Conference on the future of Europe. And it will be quite talking about experiments. This seminar is also a little bit experimental, like the conference. And we are, in fact, mostly talking about experimenting a method to do what we call problem solving. Probably this is a little bit of a legacy from my McKinsey background. I hope you can forgive me for that. But problem solving basically means to have people coming from completely different backgrounds to discuss, minimizing their how can I say, their pre-existing agenda, and try to basically overcome the lamentation on whatever does not work, basically everything, and draft some possible solution to experiment. I remember with James last year at the third conference of the future of Europe, you started your report on what we did on democracy with three saying which are the three basic keywords, which is the first one is experiments, the second is experiments, the third is experiments. Having said all that, let me go quickly on two slides. As a McKinsey, former McKinsey guy, I cannot live without. So this is the cover, but go on the next one. So basically, here the idea, which is very much ambitious, as Florian mentioned, is that we will try to put together completely different words. Here we are using this word, this epistemologic word to describe what are we talking about. Basically, we at very least have three division of the words, the people that normally talk about Europe. Actually, the ones that talk about Europe are more the ones on the bottom of the slide than the ones on the top of the slides. But we will try very much to sort of go beyond ideology. In fact, the Conference on the Future of Europe will put together the five foundations which act as think tanks of the five big European political parties. So it's not just about federalist. Number two, which is probably even more difficult, we will try to put together people coming from different professional background. So we will also have people coming from business and the regulators. But probably even more difficult to overcome is we will try to have different academic domains to talk with each other. Number three, we will also try, of course, to sort of create a safe haven where not only the big countries, the founding members of the European Union, but also the neighborhood, the East, and even the former. We will have a good representation from UK. We'll talk. The next slide, and then I will leave the floor to Luca. Here is a little bit the process that we will experiment. We drafted a concept paper, which also is gets as its own starting point, the Pontignano paper that we had in 2022. The students of the University of Siena and of EUI, we're talking about MBA, master and PhD students, will elaborate this concept paper. We are also having today a webinar, which is public. So we will also have other people who are not joining the conference to give a feedback on that concept paper. This will be an input for the so-called problem-solving groups at the conference, the first day of the conference, which will then feed the Pontignano paper, which will be they will be presented to the media the last day of the conference. Our idea is that we also want to follow up the paper with dissemination, with further dissemination and advocacy, so that these ideas, possibly fresh, radical, pragmatic, will get to the to at least some of them to influence the agenda of policymakers and the debate. I will pass to Luca with the main points of the concept paper that from which the democracy problem-solving group is starting. Luca.
Thank you, Francesco. I hope you can hear me. And I hope we can go to the next one, which is the final of this very parsimonious presentation. Actually, I don't want to add too much, first of all, because I think Francesco was very clear on the pragmatical and, how can I say, open-minded inspiration we want to create, and above all, I want to leave space, of course, to our experts and even to the young discussants, because the path we organize is that this webinar is a sort of first step to approach a common, participated, and more and more informed reflection about a good problem-solving oriented paper that it would be the, say, final contribution from the Pompignano conference. In the end, we decided to get only three, let's say, main pillars in order to summarize the starting point. And actually, the first of these three pillars is a sort of paradox, because we do not want to talk about, let's say, the intellectual origin of the so-called democratic deficit. By the way, it's really late to do that, not only late in terms of the time of the day, but I think the notion of a democratic deficit is even older than the notion of democratic representation in the European Union. I remember when I was preparing my papers in my university, the David Marquand book, I think it was published in 78 to 79. So we don't have to redefine. We have to look for the factors, and we have to debate why we still have a paradox of democratic deficit. I think that for this, it is important to listen to the voices of our plurality, our chorus that Francesco was describing in terms of different skills, professional roles, generational positions, and so on and so forth. The second point is what we started basically already with the previous conferences, but it is still a crucial aspect of our reflection. The very fact that the EU has to be conceived as a lab for innovation, because we know that there is a process of technological obsolescence, as we state in this rough summary, and we know that we have to move from the European Union experience, which is somehow the connection and the algebraical sum of a number of democratic experience from the European polities, in order to create or recreate the momentum for innovation. But this has, of course, a third and very crucial goal, which is the goal of doing its the European Union itself as a potential information system. So we have to trigger or re-trigger, depending on our evaluation of what has been done in the past, the good conditions for creating a good co-working, let's say, of all the people involved in this process, and particularly using the experience we already tested somehow at the domestic level, at the local level, at the experimental level, in order to reshaping the democracy. It's what I call, in another project which I launched recently, the strategies of rectification of a disconnected democracy. This is a problem for all our polities in Europe, but of course, European Union can, instead of lagging behind the crisis of democracy in every single specific reality, it has a chance to anticipate and preempting all the problems and offering all the democracies a good practice. I would stop here because I think that most of the things have been already touched by Francesco before me, and above all, I would like to invite our colleagues, experts in the field to take the floor, and I want to thank all the participants of this working group, even from the side, of course, of the director of the University of Siena. Thank you.
So, Jamie, I think it's you know, this is not the beginning of this journey. There has been a lot of work has been done already, and a lot of ideas have been developed. So, why don't you give us an update and a heads up on where we stand and where we're at?
Thank you, Florian, and thank you, Francesco. Thank you, Luca, for this introduction, which is also helping me to position this intervention firmly within what we're going to be discussing in person next month. And I'm much looking forward to deliberating within our working group. And this is the word that I want to riff with for the next 5 minutes or so, to give something of an update on the contribution that myself and some of my colleagues will be giving in this context. So what I would propose is, in the next kind of 4 or 5 minutes, I'd like to discuss or bring a new term to the table for this conversation so far, which is the notion of the deliberative wave. This may be a term that some people on the call are familiar with. I think it was first coined by the OECD to refer to a quite diverse range of participatory democratic exercises, for which we might include participatory budgeting, citizens' consultations, different kinds of panels that bring people and citizens more closely into political decision-making. The area that myself and Kalypso Nicolaïdis, Professor Kalypso Nicolaïdis, will be joining us later, have been focusing most of our work on, has been citizens' assemblies. I think it's worth pointing out that citizens' assemblies have been called with increasing frequency over the past 5 years. I'm remembering a statistic that I read last week that in the past 5 years, we've seen at the EU level, 70 local and 10 national citizens' assemblies called to deliberate on questions around climate change alone, which is really quite an astounding number. I think it's also worth pointing out that the kind of assemblies we're talking about are not kind of arbitrary. There's a certain degree of innovation that's already at work in the models that we're seeing at local, national, and increasingly transnational level. And this is to say they involve an element of sortition and of random selection, potentially using algorithms or other kind of deliberative tools for working out what a representative sample of a given population might be, to bring many publics together to deliberate on these specific issues. So sticking with climate, we might think of the just transition, how to deindustrialize in a fair manner, and for this deliberation to somehow feed directly into policymaking. Now, I should probably stop here because there's a lot of terminology or assumptions to unpack. I think, first of all, we might ask ourselves, what do we mean by a representative sample of a population? What criteria might we want to choose people with? Should there be a weighting towards particular minority groups, for example, or perhaps youth, which is something we might come back to throughout this conversation? Or is it the case that, you know, assembly bodies and mini publics should reflect in a purely, like a mirror, how EU society looks? So there's a kind of political question that starts to enter the discussion, even from this methodological design element. I could go on. What does it mean for assemblies to feed into policy making? This is a kind of euphemistic phrase that we find in the literature, but it comes with, you know, really serious consequences. How binding are the decisions that citizens who are assembled together going to be in the policy making process? Are these citizens advising policymakers, or should institutions politicians and policymakers be required to follow up in law directly on what the citizens are proposing. I think there's also another thing to bring to the table is the question of how do the practitioners of these exercises, which are multiplying, as I've said, ensure that the quality of conversation and deliberation is meaningful? I saw on Francesco's slide, one of the axes that we're going to be looking at is the question of ideology. And this is a really thorny but interesting issue. There are advocates of assemblies who look at this form of deliberation as something that can somehow break through polarization and create a better texture of discussion in some respects. But we also therefore have to be a bit careful and ask other questions. Who would the experts be in setting the conditions for these kind of conversations? How do we define those experts? Who else and what other kind of voices do we need to bring into that process? And ideology is one thing, but how do we then account for the politics of what this process might entail and the political disagreements therein? I was happy to hear that the Conference on the Future of Europe has been mentioned a couple of times around the Pontignano papers so far. I mean, it was for those who are in the loop and those who are not. I mean, one of the components of the conference were these transnational citizens panels. The Commission used this term panels rather than assemblies, which, with all of the caveats and criticisms we might bring, did bring together over 800 citizens to deliberate on a whole range of topics at a multilingual level across the member states, which is, to a certain extent, unprecedented, I think we can say. There are criticisms, and here at EUI and in our democracy forum, we've been talking about these for a couple of years now. I mean, the agenda setting, the question of how themes are chosen, tended to be within the context of the Conference on the Future, a rather opaque process. And there are other lists, methodological areas that we might want to unpack. Some of the most skeptical voices in this conversation have gone as far as to say that citizens' assembly as conceived in a top-down agenda setting by the institutions are little more than an expensive exercise in citizen washing. I think that's perhaps a little bit unfair given the ambition and this desire towards innovation that we're looking to discuss. And we should be honest and open to the fact that some of our colleagues and friends in the Commission and the Parliament are pushing under quite difficult institutional limits. So we might ask instead, how might future assemblies work better in a way that's more democratic, but also, and I think this is where the assemblies fit into the larger themes of the conference, more democratic, but more appropriate for the socio-economic, material, and technological conditions that we face in the EU and Europe today. So a few questions that I'd like to put on the table in advance of our discussion in person. I think we need to interrogate from the very beginning, can deliberative democracy work across borders at a transnational level at this kind of scale? And if so, what kind of methodologies, what kind of protocols would have to be in place to make such an exercise actually democratic? Finally, and I think most importantly, we have to ask, how do or could assemblies relate to other forms of democratic participation that are ongoing within the European democratic ecosystem? For example, elections, but also direct democracy in the form of, for example, referendums. So I've left you here with a lot of questions, a lot of caveats. I have my own views on a lot of these topics, but given the nature of deliberation, given the nature of the topic of assemblies, I think I'm going to stop myself here, and I'll be happy to elaborate on any of these points that I've raised later in the conversation. So thank you.
Then can I maybe, as we're waiting for Jelena and Kalypso, just ask what's your, and thank you for the introduction. Maybe you can add what's your take on, I mean, we've had the experience of the citizens' assemblies and of the European process that we've been through in the past years, which ended with citizens' assemblies basically everywhere in the process that was set up at the beginning of this term. That ended with recommendations. I was a bit surprised by the recommendations that the process came up with in the end. But what's your take on because there might be an answer to one of the questions that you asked. How can you know, a kind of deliberative democracy work alongside with elections or interfere with? Is your take on what we have seen so far that there is tension, or that there is a, you know, a productive tension perhaps? So what would your, how would you say, how would you rate the experience?
It's a great question, Florian. Thank you. I mean, I think there's a certain part of the deliberative democracy world of scholarship, and not only, let's remember my background is in journalism, so I come with a particular answer to this question, but there's a particular area within some of the scholarship that tries to treat citizens' assemblies as if they can, in and of themselves, solve a lot of the problems of our time. I mean, I think we need to be completely honest from the offset. You know, a citizens' assembly is not going to solve climate change. It's not going to solve a lot of the key regulatory questions of our time. It's clear, going back to the point one of Luca's list, that when we're exploring questions of democratic deficit, one of the way, or which we obviously have problematized and don't have time to go into too much detail on here, politicians and institutions are not going to be re-regulating themselves without some kind of impetus. So the short answer is, the way that I think that assemblies fit into the larger ecosystem is as a way of funneling and channeling the citizen energies in such a way that strategic partnerships might be formed in order to improve the qualities of representative democracy and the behavior of the Commission. So it's another layer of accountability, it's another layer of empowerment for citizens, but in and of itself, I don't think it should be treated as a perfectly purely technocratic policy-making tool that will replace other parts of the political process. So I hope that in part answers the question. I think there's many other routes we could take. The fact that these mini publics are often existing in a very small bubble for the fact that, by necessity of the nature of deliberative democracy in an assembly context, we're involving a small group of citizens who are not, you know, invested in the larger narratives and ideas about political change that we see in Europe. This is something that's clearly a strength of elections and of representative democracy. They bring large publics, they bring large constituencies, and they're able to foreground some of the conversations about tackling these specific issues. So I have a rather limited faith in what citizens' assemblies can do, but I think that the work has to be done, given that this deliberative wave is taking place, given these exercises are being funded left, right, and center by private actors, by the institutions, by the grassroots. We have to be able to find a voice within that space to see how it serves the overall goals of regulatory goals and democratizing goals that we'll be discussing in Pontignano and I'm sure beyond.
Now, this is a good point to first welcome and then bring her into the discussion. Jelena Dzankic, Professor Dzankic, thanks for joining us here. I would like you to reply. Basically, you've heard what my question to Jamie was, what the experience shows about the relations between deliberative democracy and citizens' assemblies in more particular terms. And the institutional setup of the European Union as we know it. So maybe that's a good jumping board for you to get in and take over from here. And I will, out of this and leave it all to you. Thanks again.
Okay. I think that there are some issues with your connection, Florian, but anyways, thank you so much to Francesco for the invitation, and apologies for joining only briefly, but I don't think artificial intelligence has yet found a way for us to be in two places at the same time. If they manage to let me know, because I'll be the first one to start using it. I'm delighted to take part in this timely and much needed discussion on the future of democracy in Europe. And I think the question that you've raised, Florian, is an extremely, extremely important one, because more than ever, Europe is nowadays in need of a democracy. It's actually in a dire need of listening to the voices of its citizens, to listening to the voices of those who constitute, if you wish, the European demos. And I think that citizens' assemblies can provide us far more answers and more substantive answers about the citizen experiences of the daily life and how institutions shape those experiences of theirs. Now, very often when we speak about democracy, we talk about institutions of democracy. But I think we also need to bring citizens to the center of our discussions. And I think that if we reflect on the experiences of the last decade and the crisis, if you wish, the crisis of democracy, the financial crisis, the security crisis, the energy crisis, as scholars, we often think about those as crisis of institutions, right? Crisis of paradigms that have been established, crisis of the economical system, et cetera, et cetera. Yet we kind of tend to forget that all of these crises have been felt, have been experienced by European citizens. And if you think about it, these crises have shaped their political attitudes and preferences that have then translated into new institutions of governance. So I think listening to people before they actually translate their votes into institutions can help us to improve the political process overall. And I think that this is an extremely important issue, especially nowadays in the context of maintaining a peaceful and safe Europe. Now, I just want to briefly finish off by a quick reflection on the current political and geopolitical context, because I don't think that European questions can be discussed without the reflection of broader geopolitics. And we've seen that the war in Ukraine, Russian aggression, has brought back the question of EU enlargement on the agenda. Now, if you think about it, it's a question of European future. It's also an opportunity, at least in my humble opinion, to try and embrace a more open vision of what Europe is and who its citizens actually are. And I think that I'll just end on this note, on this hopeful note, and I hope that these remarks can stimulate further discussions here and also in Pontignano very soon.
Well, thank you very much, Jelena, for this. I'd just like to keep the discussion going. Kalypso, welcome to this webinar and to the call. Thanks for joining us here. Maybe I can give the floor to you after Jelena's remarks on the relations between deliberative democracy, as we're talking about, and the EU institutions as we know them. Jamie kicked us off on that, and Jelena, you've heard what Jelena just said, so maybe this is a good point in time in this discussion to bring you in. As Francesco also had a little point to add, as I see him nodding, saw him nodding during Jelena's intervention. Maybe Francesco, you go first, and then Kalypso, the floor is all yours.
No, I won't dare to. No, it's Kalypso. I can wait. No problem.
Good.
Well, I mean, you know, it's not very democratic to jump in a webinar where you haven't heard your wonderful colleagues and then kind of pontificate for a few minutes, you know, and leave again. So maybe we can kind of use this as a metaphor for the fact that, you know, everything we're talking about in a way, like in the world, is always power struggles. Who can decide, and who decides in our societies about what is the common good, what we should do about it. And there is an ancient notion that, well, it should be the people in a democracy, but we live in kind of technocratic, aristocratic system where it's not quite the people, except once in a blue moon. And so I think that the conversation we're all having is how we can kind of both jump very far in the past, the intuitions of the ancients, and by the way, not just the ancient Greeks, but the whole of the Middle East and 2,000 and 3,000 years ago, but also the Renaissance, where we are here in Florence, and where you, Florian, spend a lot of time, and you know, but also jump further in the future, because I have no doubt that are kids and their kids and the next kid, yeah, they'll experience really bad stuff with the transition, but they'll also experience a world where people will still absolutely not countenance the idea that, you know, if you're wealthy, if you're a capitalist, you decide one way or another the destiny of others. You know, we have distributed intelligence and distributed power already. That's what our next generation do. So I think us here, I mean, a bit in an elitist webinar, and I'm not sure, I mean, I'm seeing 10 people on the screen, but I think we're more. You know, we're not the people here, we're not that representative, but we want to think about how we reinvent the way in which we distribute power in our societies. And I think that in Pontignano, I very much hope that we can, you know, do this together, not just talk about it, but do it. So that's all I want to say, because I'm not here for, again, please let me know what else you want. Yes, Florian, you asked relationship with Brussels. We work a lot with EU institutions, us here at EUI. I'm sure Jamie's already talked about this. And, you know, there are all sorts of people there, like in every institutions, and some really kind of see the light and want to open up, and others, you know, they think they do well, they do better, they know what they're talking about, and it's the Weberian state at the EU level, you know, and fair enough, you know, you want to respect all sorts of mindsets, but it's interesting to do an anthropology and a sociology of power in EU institutions, in member states, and in every institution, to understand, you know, how and who is open to sharing power and who isn't.
Thank you very much, Kalypso. I would like to use these as the very best possible invitation for the three Siena University students who are on this call, to take it from there and to start a discussion actually among yourselves and with Kalypso and Jelena and James and Francesco and Luca. So please, this is not something I would want to direct or I would want to give the floor to. I would just invite you to please take it from there and give us your takes on what we've just heard and on what we want to achieve at Pontignano.
I'll go first, if I may. First of all, thank you all for your interesting comments and intervention. It's really good to be here. So thank you, first of all, for this opportunity. As part of the problem-solving group about democracy and the innovative instruments we are using to boost democratic participation at EU level, we are trying to focus our research especially on the aspect of voters turnout and to boost wider participation on the level of the EU issues and challenges. So also in light of your concept notes, of your references, resources that you gave us, we are analyzing the most positive aspects, the most positive case studies of experiments about the innovative instruments we were discussing about, and we are trying to better focus on the limitations that comes when we speak about engagement, wider engagement, because as we were previously discussing, of course, the electronic voting and citizens' assemblies might be very good instruments to boost this participation. But we were asking ourselves as students and as citizens who are not really into the into political parties or into political environments, how do we get in touch with the evolution, with the developments that the European Union is facing, and how can we be really part of these developments? How can we be informed about the instruments that are going to reboost democracy and democratic participation? So I will leave the floor also to my colleagues, Eleonora and Elena, to explore some questions that we have in light of our research. Thank you.
Hi, everyone. I'm very sorry because my camera doesn't work. And so as Lala said, we consider it positive cases, but also other less positive ones. And we focused, for example, about the Norway case studies, which experienced some security problems in a technological sense. But we were also thinking about citizen security in an ethical sense. For example, we were thinking about a person who votes from home and may not be guaranteed the security of the secrecy of the vote, since the housemate will be present or could be influenced or feel pressured by the different opinions on the vote of others people. And also, furthermore, as regards the possibility to have an internet connection, we know, since in any case making the vote online does not eliminate the paper vote, but it requires about 16 times more the time used for the one online. And maybe the solution could be to develop the vote in presence on 2 levels. So vote online from home and vote in hubs that guarantee internet connection to those who can't afford it. And again, about the case study of Norway, which had the possibility of the so-called 3 trials and experienced no growth in the turnout, we asked ourselves if this was the only goal of the project, and therefore a case like this is no longer taken into consideration, or if despite this, it is still interesting bringing the vote online, even if in the involvement remains at the same level. And I leave the floor to Eleonora. Thank you.
Thank you, everybody, for your interventions and contributions. It's a very important opportunity for me to be here, and thanks also to my colleagues. In addition to the analysis of limitations and cases for the use of innovative tools of e-voting, we were also thinking about how could be implemented the engagement of young Europeans, as we feel that in order to address the issue of lack of participation in electoral turnouts, it could be interesting to adopt a strategy to expand and spread more direct and specific participation, and call for participation in to young Europeans, as I feel that a lot of young people seem to be interested in the exercise of an active citizenship, but sometimes not so concerned about European policies and their political representation. And I think, and we consider that it could be also maybe due to a not direct information and not easy access to a lot of information about European institutions and European policy-making agenda. So this is another line we are taking for our work. Thank you.
So thank you, Laila, Eleonora, and Elena. Thank you for your inputs. I don't know if someone wants to reply to them, and if you have some comments on what they shared with us. I know that Francesco wanted to add something, so maybe.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes, Clara, I will add one small thing that I was supposed to say before Kalypso, but I didn't dare. Now, let me say that to try to rescue democracy and therefore to advance experimentation is not just a question of justice. It's not just a question of values. It is a question of survival. I mean, it looks like this is my thesis. That democracy is not doing well at all. It's not just a question of the number of democratic countries decreasing consistently according to the the Economist Intelligence Economist Democracy Index. It is not just a question of democratic countries growing less than not democratic countries. To me, it is very much a question of an information revolution that has eroded more or less while we were doing something else. We did not even realize the information advantage that democracy used to have on not democratic countries for few centuries, basically the centuries of industrial revolution. And now it is really a question of sort of quickly reinventing democracy before it is too late. And if I can say one very small thing about the democratic deficit paradox, the paradox which I would very much invite the students and everybody to reflect is that we are just going the other way around. Whereas we should accelerate on innovating democracy, it looks that we are growing more and more conservative. If we want to talk for a second about the democratic deficit, the European democratic deficit, which is a very old question to which we have dedicated thousands of conferences with various think tanks. The reality is that now, if you look to something that at European level was called the Spitzencandidate process, by Spitzencandidate, it is meant the idea that before the next European Parliament election, the various European political groups will indicate not their candidate, more or less like it happens in Italy. It's not like a formal direct election of the President of the European Commission, but at least it is an attempt to attach a name to a party. That thing is basically being dismantled. So we are not even moving in the right direction. So the paradox, the thing that we should probably think about is why this very fascinating debate, which that Kalypso has been promoting with a few other people, not many, with James and everything, and Alberto Alemanno, etc. It is still a very much niche debate with Luca Verzichelli. It is a debate that basically very few people know about. So how can we do this demand for renovating democracy to be much more mainstream, so that one day we will talk as the people, as Kalypso was asking before? Kalypso.
No, I just want to say in the end, I think this, of course, a fundamental question, and the students have asked all sorts of important questions, including on e-voting and so how do we reconcile their world with this kind of their world and the world of the internet and technology, where we need to flatten democracy. We need to invent a democracy where the technology allows to connect phones and people horizontally, and there's a fascinating debate on how technology can do that bottom up, as well as in our minds, with still the issue, and that's horizontal power. So we have horizontal power, we have vertical power, as in delegating through chains of responsibility, and the Spitzencandidate is part of that story, which tries to make a more direct connection with the people in elections, but it's still a delegation story. And of course, in our technical modern world, we need to delegate. But let's try to always ask how we reconcile these two dimensions when we are. So it's not just about doing horizontal citizen assembly, it's to connect them, to ask where the power lies. And power lies with people when they can come up with approaches, solutions, mindset that are different, from what happens in the traditional apparatus. So I think that's where we will be in Pontignano. I'm really looking forward to this. I'm going to turn off my camera now and listen to what others may have to say.
Thank you.
Kalypso. I don't know if Luca or Jamie, yes, I see, Luca, that you have raised your hand. If you want to comment on what they said and also on what the 3 students said before on their work, because you are their tutor in this process and in their work. So please, Luca, thank you.
Yeah, thank you. But this is just a footnote. I was very impressed by the reflections, and actually I think that Kalypso was then touching the key point, somehow connecting point 2 and point 3 of my very short intervention. So in other words, if we want to conceive a good connection between what Kalypso said, the vertical and the horizontal dimension of democratic power, what we have to do is to take care of all the experiences that we already have been able to produce and also to test at the horizontal level, because we have data on this and we have experience, although as reflected in different intervention from our younger discussion, we need to share more, and this is probably our goal, and we have to start from the next discussion in Pontignano, and to connect this with all the other mechanisms more or less implemented at the domestic local level and somehow debated for a long time at the European Union level on the other axis, the axis of the so-called reconnection of the representative mechanism, which is still, as Kalypso say, a vertical kind of power delegation, basically. I think this is the key point: how to rejoin a discussion and very frankly and very openly discussing all these experiences from those who we already know, from the electronic voting at the local level, from the use of referendum, of course, and all the other forms of corrections, to the experiments in the field of deliberation, which is something in which we have, and particularly thanks to our colleagues, we have a remarkable knowledge, and we should, give more voice to this experience.
Thank you, Luca. So, Jamie, you wanted to add something?
Yeah, thank you, Luca. Thank you, everyone. This is a response to Lila's question about how do we give visibility to these experiments. Again, I'm speaking with my journalistic hat on, as well as a research hat at this moment. I mean, we shouldn't lose track of the institutional calendar and the unique opportunity of next year to make a splash. We have the European Parliament elections in the spring of 2024, a new commission coming in September. There's the need for a very loud advocacy campaign in the media from grassroots social movements to work with the MEPs that may be willing to insert clauses around these mechanisms and tools into their party manifestos. This in turn is something that can galvanize a certain degree of a broader media conversation around these kinds of openings. So of course, this requires funding. It requires making strategic alliances at different levels of discourse and with different kinds of linguistic profiles. So there are those who talk about these issues within, and I do not mean this necessarily as a pejorative thing, within a technocratic landscape of the way that they are speaking. And then there's the need to translate this to people's everyday experience, the way that voters who are not in tune with this kind of rhetoric or this way of discussing politics can also feel that they are part of that discussion. So the elections themselves, because representative democracy brings with it generally much bigger publics into narratives and into discussions, this seems to me a very strategic moment in which to begin to bring the question of transnational deliberation into the discussion around the European Parliament. So it's not going to happen overnight, but there's the prospects for the beginning of an advocacy campaign beginning almost immediately. I think we're at a key strategic junction. So I pause there.
just wanted to tell to everyone who is listening here on Zoom or on Facebook that you can ask questions to our panelists, and we will give you the word and to ask them. So if someone wants to intervene, it's free to do it. And I don't know if Francesco, you wanted to add something, or Luca?
Yeah, no. One very small point here. It is a question. Somebody was saying before, I don't remember who, climate change will not be solved by deliberative democracy. It was James, in fact. Probably you are right. I hope you are not. That's a very good example of a case where you have an institutional policy making setting which is completely hopeless. You have 197 member states and I mean the results are very, very much clear. Now my question to the students and to everybody is whether we may need some case to which innovative mechanism of participation may apply. I mean, it's a big, which is different from advocating for a broader application of whatever deliberative democracy, whatever. We may think that, for instance, just as a matter of an example, the green stuff may be the right case, also because there is an urgency. There is probably some demand, some more demand, especially from young people. So this is just a suggestion to think about. James, I don't know if you have an immediate reaction to that.
You'd have to leave it with me, Francesco, for a little bit. Maybe you want to discuss in Pontignano, but I think...
Okay, all right, okay.
I was struck by, just very concretely, that we saw, to name names, Extinction Rebellion is one example of a climate activism group that formally have changed their strategy away from what they call disruptive actions and more towards calling for, at least in the UK context, for a citizens' assembly on climate policy and on climate issues. And it might be an interesting thing to discuss. How viable is that as a demand? How would it fit into regular parliamentary process? So I fully endorse taking that conversation further, but I maintain a certain degree of skepticism, I must say, about whether or not it can really get the results in time that we need to achieve.
Thank you, Jamie. I see Lila's hand raised, so please, Lila. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. I just wanted to answer Francesco. I was thinking about the chance that already exists to collect, for example, signature to present an idea to the European Parliament or to bring to their attention some issues. This is just a case of climate change related questions. That is something that happened, but also in this case, our doubt is how to make this instrument available not only to those who are really into the issues, because of course I would think about climate change related issues and challenges connected to that, but maybe I'm not really into association or other entities who are directly connected to this kind of instruments and who have a direct also connection with MPs. So what we are trying to verify here is how do we make these instruments available to the greater possible audience, to engage and to engage participation. So here I can see a sort of boundary with the concept of representing ideas and groups and to participations. I don't know if I made it clear somehow, but this is what we would like to further explore.
Okay.
Okay, if someone wants to comment on what Laila said, of course.
So I'm not sure if it answers the ability to speak to large publics and to bring in a totally diverse range of people. But I think it's worth remarking that when we discuss citizens' assemblies, sometimes we think of sortition and random selection as if it precludes other forms of selection that we might accompany that with. One of the key examples might be quotas for marginalized groups. So I think, for example, let's take a concrete example of Roma people or people who don't have citizenship rights. To give a tangible example, if we imagined an assembly where there was a quota for non-citizens of the EU who are in EU countries, having a space within deliberation, we could imagine the texture and nature of those conversations would be quite different than what we see when you don't have that quota in place. Therefore, I think one thing leads to another. The kinds of recommendations you get, the kind of output that comes from these mini publics becomes more interesting, it becomes more accessible, it becomes more democratic. So there's the question of, in addition to sortition, what mechanisms, what quotas, what other factors might we consider in the selection process in order to try and make these processes more open and more in touch with what's happening outside of the mini public. So I think that's a key part of the answer alongside the need for campaigning and advocacy.
Thank you so much.
Okay, Clara,
Yes.
if we don't have question from the floor, we probably can even call this very first meeting here.
Yes.
Can we?
Yes. If
I think it was talking about experiment. I am personally happy. We are trying something new, completely new. It's not an Italian convenio, as I always say. It is about problem solving, but not only problem solving. We really would like to have at the end of the Pontignano conference, say 2 ideas for each problem solving group. So 2 from the working group on democracy that we can advocate. As James was suggesting, and I'm very happy to have the James energy here, and also Lucas and everybody else and the students. We really want those 2 ideas to really become a sort of, if I can say, big word, a political battle, to say something that Luca is certainly very keen about it, you know. So it's like, well, democracy, just, you know, for everybody to remember what we already know, was not a gift, you know, it was absolutely not a gift. No, the generation of our great grandparents risked their lives for democracy. And in fact, democracy is not even something that we can take for granted. So it is about advocating, you know, at least a couple of small, pragmatic, fresh ideas, and probably see out of those 2, 3 ideas, at least one to become a reality. You know, so that's a little bit the ambition, and we really would need the energy of everybody to become many more. The people, as Kalypso said at the beginning. So this is it. I don't know if we have something else. By the way, I want just to specify that even if my second name is Grillo, I'm not relative to Beppe, since what we just said in this seminar. But you know, still. We are very far relative. So I don't know if we have something else to otherwise we can call it here. Luca, I don't know if you want to finish with something.
No, just to confirm our commitment to find this a very pragmatical and very, very sharp ideas, and everybody who wants to collaborate. Of course, we have Vision and Unisi email contacts to send us any kind of feedback, even after the closing of this webinar.
Thank you. Thanks a lot.
Thanks.
Participation and to be the first one to open this series of 4 webinars that we are organizing to set the discussion in Siena. I'm going just to share. I'm going to share for a moment the calendar of all the 4 exercises that we are going to do starting today until the end of the month. So to be more prepared and more confident for the work in Siena. So I wanted to thank again the 3 students from University of Siena for their work. And of course, if anyone would like to join the conversation and the preparation of this session, we are open to this, of course. And that's it. Thank you, everyone, for today and for your collaboration in this.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thanks a lot.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.